Hey, what's going on, guys? Rogue Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Fury Warrior for Season 1 of Mythic Plus and the War Within. Go ahead and start out with some of the pros and cons of playing something like Fury Warrior. Why would you want to pick this spec up? So Fury Warrior has pretty good sustained multi-target damage, and we also have pretty good AoE cooldowns as well that are going to be on a fairly short cooldown. So you're not having to funnel a whole bunch of your burst damage behind like 2 to 3 minute cooldowns. Pretty much everything's under 2 minutes, with your strongest cooldowns being about 1.5 minutes. We're also a specialization that doesn't have to sacrifice too much between single target and AoE. Something like Retribution Paladin has to sacrifice a bunch of single target for AoE, and then vice versa. Fury Warrior is actually also one of the stronger melee DPSs in terms of survivability. They just have a ton of self-healing, and they also have pretty good defensives, especially with something like Spell Reflection being on a 25-second cooldown, which is pretty crazy considering that it helps reduce the magic damage you take by 20% for 5 seconds. Another pro of playing something like Fury Warrior is we're very mobile. We have our charge, we also have our heroic leap, and then of course, if spec'd into it, we also have our intervene. So mobility is definitely a huge pro of playing something like Fury Warrior. Now we do have some weaknesses. We are melee, so it's going to be hard to kind of cleave, spread out targets. So if you don't have really good pack density, you're not going to be able to do a whole bunch of damage. We're also pretty cooldown reliant, so outside of our cooldowns, our sustained damage isn't great. And downtime is also a big factor when playing Warrior. It's the same issue with Arms Warrior. Whenever you're not in melee range and you have to kind of run out of the fight to avoid a mechanic, you're going to see your DPS really suffer. And the final weaknesses we did talk about earlier about how they have such great self-sustain. Well, that requires hitting a target. And again, there's many mechanics in this game that's going to require you to run away from your targets to not get hit by something. And in that period, you're pretty squishy. Okay, let's talk a little bit about utility. So the first spell we're going to be talking about is our Battle Shout, 15-second cooldown. And you're just going to press it, and your entire party is going to get 5% attack power. So you're going to be pretty strong with specific comps. You know, something like Windwalker Monk, Demon Hunters, Marksmanship Hunters. And this pairs pretty nicely with something like a Monk who would bring the Mystic Touch debuff, because that's going to increase the damage that mobs take by 5%. So that stacked with your Battle Shout is a very nice buff to your damage. Our main interrupt is going to be Pummel. That's on a 15-second cooldown. One thing to note is that Pummel cannot be used during our Blade Storm. Another utility is going to be our Storm Bolt, so that's going to be on a 30-second cooldown. And then, of course, we have our AoE Stun, and that's going to be on a 40-second cooldown, so it's going to be really good when you go into a pack and you need to interrupt multiple enemies at once. So, and then we also have one of the stronger defensives in the game, Spell Reflection, 25-second cooldown. Reduces magic damage taken by 20%, which is pretty insane considering the low cooldown on it. So this should be used multiple times per pull, especially in hierarchies where packs are taking, like a minute per pull. So make sure you're just kind of sending this on cooldown. Then our final utility is going to be Berserker Rage on a 1 minute cooldown. Pretty rare to use this, but if you are feared, you can use this to break a fear effect or any sort of disorient effect that will also break. And then one thing I did forget to mention in the weaknesses of playing something like Fury Warrior is we do not bring a Battle Res and we do not bring a Lust. So we don't fit into too many team compositions, unfortunately. However, most tanks bring a Battle Res, so you really don't have to worry about that one too much. And then another spot will be reserved, of course, for a DPS that brings Lust, so you will be competing with one of 2 slots in most group compositions, versus a spec that does bring Lust will be competing for one of the 3 DPS slots. Okay, so the way that Fury Warrior works is you're going to be generating a resource called Rage, and that is through your auto attacks. And then you also have specific abilities that generate Rage, so something like our Bloodthirst. So what you're looking to do is build up as much Rage as you possibly can, and then you're going to dump that resource into some of your harder hitting abilities, such as your Rampage. So you really want to avoid overcapping on Rage because that will be wasted damage. So that'll be one of the highest priorities in your rotation, is just make sure you're not overcapping on your Rage bar. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at some of your core talents here. So at the very top of the tree, we're going to have Bloodthirst and our Raging Blow. These are going to be your 2 main rage generators. Then in the very center of the tree, we have a spell called Rampage, and this costs 80 rage. Then I guess just to read it out here, enrages you and unleashes a series of 4 brutal strikes, dealing X amount of damage and empowering your next Bloodthirst and Raging Blow. Now, if we go directly below that, each Rampage strike has a 25% chance to refund a charge of Raging Blow, again, which is the spell here. Now, Rampage is probably going to be your strongest hitting ability. You see it costs 80 rage, which is most of your rage bar. And the reason it's really strong in both single target and especially in AoE is due to improved Whirlwind here on the right. So this causes your next 2 single target attacks to strike up to 4 additional targets for 55% damage. So what you can do is you can Whirlwind right before you Rampage, and that will turn Rampage basically into an AoE spell. And Whirlwind does work with spells like Raging Blow and Bloodthirst as well. We'll talk about that a little bit more once we get into the rotation section. Now, one of the key components of playing a Fury Warrior is this Enrage effect. So when you use your spells to get yourself enraged, we have, just for example, here at Powerful Enrage, you deal 15% in additional damage while Enrage is active. We also have spells like Focus and Chaos. While Enrage, your auto attacks can no longer miss. And we also have spells down here like Deft Experience, Mastery increased by 2%, and if you are enraged, Bloodthirst extends your enrage by 1 second. We've got talents over here on the right, Cruelty. Raging Blood does 15% increased damage while enraged. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get in this sort of enraged state and then send your damage. So the question is, how do you get enraged? Well, you can get enraged through spells like your Rampage, and you can also get enraged through your passive here. So our Bloodthirst ability has a 30% chance to enrage us as well. And it's also very important to note what our Mastery even is. So while enraged, our damage is going to be increased by X% based on the amount of Mastery that you have. In my case, it's 29.9%. So being enraged while you send cooldowns is very, very important. And typically what you want to do to manually apply that enrage is going to be through your Rampage. Now, other notable talents are going to be Odin's Fury on a 45-second cooldown. So you press it, does a whole bunch of damage, it generates rage, but it also, if you take Titanic Rage below it, will enrage you. And this will also grant us 2 stacks of our Whirlwind effect. So this means our single target abilities are now AoE abilities, essentially. Then we also do have some other pretty powerful talents here. We have Recklessness, 1.5 minute cooldown. This is going to make us go Berserk, and it's going to increase our rage generation by 100% and grant our abilities 20% increased critical strike chance for 12 seconds. And of course, we also have our Blade Storm on a 1.5 minute cooldown. You pretty much go into this AoE frenzy, you send your Blade Storm in a circle and do a whole bunch of damage, and you are immune to movement impairing effects while this is active. And it also generates a whole bunch of rage for us. And then we also have Unhinged. So Unhinged is going to cast a Bloodthirst every other proc of your Blade Storm. So, of course, that Bloodthirst does have a chance to enrage us. Now, we also have sort of an execute phase that's not quite as complicated as something like Arms Warrior, because our execute has a cooldown associated with it. However, let's just read this out. Your attacks against your primary target have a high chance to overwhelm their defenses and trigger a Slayer Strike, dealing X amount of damage and applying Marked for Execution, increasing the damage you take from your next execute by 15%, stacks up to 3 times. So this means when Execute does become available for us to press, it's a pretty high priority button. Then at the very bottom of the tree, we have Unrelenting Onslaught. When you execute a target that you mark for execution, you both reduce the cooldown of Blade Storm by 5 seconds and apply 2 stacks of Overwhelm to the target per stack of Marked for Execution consumed. Now, we said earlier that you cannot pummel or Storm Bolt while Blade Storming. So in the Slayer tree, you actually can. Okay, let's go ahead and get into some more rotation. So let's just talk about single target priority and AoE priority. Okay, let's go ahead and quickly talk about our opener. So our opener is going to be pretty simple. The only thing that's going to change between single target and AoE is our Odin's Fury spell. And I guess there is one more, also Thunderous Roar. So Thunderous Roar and Odin's Fury are not used in your single target opener, but they are in your AoE. So your opener is going to look something like this. You'll charge in, then you'll go into your Recklessness, then your Avatar, then you'll Blade Storm, and then you'll just kind of go into your normal priority. The key here, making sure that you do Enrage right before you go into that Blade Storm. So it looks something like this. And then from here, you'll just proceed in that normal priority. And then your AoE opener will look the exact same. The only difference is that right before you Rampage, you'll go into a Thunderous Roar, and then right after you Blade Storm, you will Odin's Fury. So it's all kind of used together. So waiting on cooldowns here, then we'll take a look at that. 3, 2, 1. And then right after this, we'll go into our Odin's Fury. And then that's your typical AoE opener. Okay, so looking at our normal priority. So after your opener, this is kind of what you're looking to prioritize. And the first 5 steps are really just cooldowns. Step 3, obviously you went to Rampage if your Enrage is not active. And typically you want to pair your Avatar and your Odin's Fury here with something called Titanic Rage. Odin's Fury enrages you, deals 10% increased damage, and grants you 2 stacks of Whirlwind. So we want to pair that effect with our hard-hitting cooldowns. Our next priority will be our Execute with those 3 stacks of Mark for Execution. And then we are not running Ashen Juggernaut, so we do not have to worry about that in this specific build. Up next, we'll want to prioritize our Crushing Blow. So if you're not sure what Crushing Blow is, so basically what Crushing Blow and Bloodbath are their improved versions of your Raging Blow and your Bloodthirst after you do a Rampage. So after Rampage, basically Bloodthirst and your Raging Blow become higher in priority through these two spells, Crushing Blow and Bloodbath. And then from here, just simply Rampage, Execute, and Bloodthirst. And then Execute, it's shown here twice, and the reason it's higher in priority here on 6 is because we do not want to overcap on our Mark for Execution stacks, so we want to get rid of those 3 stacks. And then, of course, down here, if there's nothing else to press, then and you only have 1 stack of Marks for Execution, go ahead and press it. And then if there is absolutely nothing else to press, then you can slam or improve Whirlwind. Okay, now let's go ahead and get into the AoE rotation. And I say rotation, more like a priority. So same sort of deal, right? You'd be sending your cooldowns pretty much the same order as in single target. The only difference here is Rampage is not in the mix. And then we also get a very high priority on our Whirlwind buff. So again, this is going to be what's turning all of our single target spells down here into AoE spells. Then from here, you have a very similar priority list as you did in single target. So essentially, after we do a Rampage, we'll want to prioritize that Crushing Blow and Bloodbath over pretty much everything. Again, this is reapplied through that Reckless Abandon talent. Then from there, we'll prioritize Execute, and then we'll be filling with Bloodthirst and Raging Blow that is buffed up by our Whirlwind buff. Okay, guys, then from here, your stat priority is obviously going to be Strength over pretty much everything into Mastery. Again, our Mastery is going to increase our damage while we're enraged. And then Haste is going to be pretty strong for us so that we can attack more. We can spend more abilities quicker. We can get more rage and then dump that rage back into hard-hitting abilities. So more rage, more damage. Then Versatility is going to be pretty nice for that increased damage reduction that we get from it. We are a melee DPS. We're not ranged, so we're going to be taking a little bit more damage. And then finally, Critical Strike coming in at the number 5 spot. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing to the channel. See you on the next one.